Richard Goodall's journey from a humble janitor in Terre Haute to the stage of America's Got Talent is nothing short of extraordinary. Yet behind the applause and confetti, there's a deeper story of heartbreak, resilience, and the emotional price of fame. The world is in shock as Simon Cowell breaks in tears on live TV after what happened to Richard Goodall. The night that stopped the world. It was supposed to be just another climactic finale on a well-rehearsed stage, the bright lights, the roaring crowd, the slow build of tension before the final reveal. But what unfolded that night would become a moment etched into the collective memory of millions, a rupture in the polished fabric of live television that no one could have anticipated. As the host's voice rose to announce the winner, the air itself seemed to tighten, thick with expectation and a strange, unspoken dread. Then came the name, Richard Goodall. For a brief second, there was a stunned silence, the kind of silence that doesn't merely fill a room, but seems to erase the very idea of noise altogether. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happened. The audience watched Richard Goodall, America's Got Talent's humble janitor, visibly overwhelmed and speechless. He stood rooted to the spot, momentarily stunned by the enormity of the moment. Viewers everywhere felt their own throats tighten, their own chests heave. Across social media, live feeds exploded, not with memes or sarcastic commentary, but genuine outpourings of joy, surprise, and empathy. This wasn't just the coronation of another overnight celebrity. It was an authentic moment of triumph for an ordinary man. Richard Goodall had done what no multi-million-dollar production, no manufactured drama, no perfect performance ever could. He broke the machinery of spectacle and made it real. And as the celebrations gave way to something darker, more aching, one question gripped everyone who had witnessed it. What was the real story behind the janitor who stopped the world? They would not have to wait long to find out. The janitor with the golden voice. In the quiet heart of Terre Haute, Indiana, a town stitched together by railroad tracks, aging factories, and generations of modest dreams, Richard Goodall lived a life invisible to most. Each morning, before the sun had fully claimed the sky, he pulled on his worn work boots and made his way to West Vigo Middle School, keys jangling at his hip, pushing his cart of mops, brooms, and cleaning supplies through the fluorescent-lit corridors. To the students, he was Mr. Goodall, the kind man who never let a trash can overflow or a hallway stay messy for long. But there were whispers, always whispers. If you stayed late after school, you might hear it, the way the walls themselves seemed to hum with the sound of his voice. Alone, pushing a mop or replacing a broken light, Richard sang, and not just idle humming, he sang. Deep, soul-stirring renditions of songs that seemed too big, too magnificent for such an ordinary place. It wasn't vanity that kept him singing. It wasn't some distant dream of stardom. For Richard, music was a survival mechanism, a thin, golden thread that held together the frayed fabric of a life marked by hardship, struggles with depression, years of scraping by paycheck to paycheck, losses too personal to parade before the world. Through it all, his voice was his shield and his salvation. And then, like all seismic shifts, it started with something small, a school assembly, a microphone offered half-jokingly, a performance of Journey's Don't Stop Believin' that made the room fall still, not out of politeness, but awe. A teacher, stunned, pulled out a smartphone and captured a few minutes of the magic. That video, unpolished and shaky, found its way online. The internet did what it sometimes does best. It listened. Within days, Richard's video racked up thousands, then millions of views. The comments flooded in from locals, strangers, even celebrities. Offers trickled in. Morning shows wanted to interview him. Agents began making cautious inquiries. And then the invitation came. America's Got Talent. It wasn't ambition that made Richard accept. It was something deeper. A quiet, private decision. Maybe it wasn't too late to let the world hear the voice that had kept him alive for so long. Maybe the dreams he had stuffed into the corners of his life didn't have to stay hidden. When Richard Goodall walked onto that enormous stage under the blinding lights of a GT, he didn't stride with the confidence of youth or the bravado of experience. He stood there simply, a man, middle-aged, wearing a borrowed jacket and a heart full of trembling hope. And when he sang, it wasn't just a performance, it was a lifetime pouring out in sound, a dream rekindled. Behind every note that flowed from Richard Goodall's voice lived decades of heartbreak that could not be erased, no matter how sweet the melody. Long before the spotlights, the standing ovations, and the YouTube clips viewed by millions, Richard had faced a loss so profound it nearly swallowed him whole. Years earlier, cancer had come like a thief in the night, robbing him of his beloved wife, the woman who had been not just his partner, but the very foundation of his existence. Her illness was not sudden, but prolonged, drawn out over aching months filled with hospital visits, whispered prayers, and an ever-tightening grip of helplessness. Richard stood by her side through every agonizing moment, his own dreams relegated to the forgotten corners of his heart. He didn't sing publicly during those years. He barely sang at all. Music, once his passion, became a private language of mourning, something too painful to share with the world. After her passing, Richard's life shrank into something smaller, quieter. He poured himself into his custodial job at West Vigo Middle School, not out of ambition, but out of necessity, a place where the simple act of polishing hallways offered the kind of structure grief demands when nothing else makes sense. Children came and went, years blurred together. The man with the golden voice became a silent guardian of empty classrooms, his talents buried beneath the weight of daily survival. Yet even grief cannot hold the human spirit hostage forever. Slowly, tentatively, Richard found his way back to life and to love. Meeting his fiancée, Angie, was a second sunrise he hadn't dared to hope for. Her warmth and steady encouragement rekindled something inside him he thought had been lost forever. But love found after devastation is never simple. The past does not release its grip easily. Even as he smiled beside Angie, even as he planned for a new future, the shadows of his first marriage lingered, not as a burden, but as a solemn presence that never truly left. When you're married for so long and they pass away and you've got that void there, your biggest concern is figuring out who you are without them, Richard later reflected. And music was the bridge again. Every song Richard sang carried the resonance of two lifetimes, one filled with the tenderness of memory and one fueled by the fragile hope of second chances. Music was not merely an art for him, it was survival. It was a connection. It was the one bridge strong enough to carry both his joy and his sorrow at once. So when the opportunity to audition for America's Got Talent arrived, Richard hesitated. Dreams felt dangerous when you knew what it was like to lose everything. But then he thought of her, his late wife, who used to sit beside him as he strummed his old guitar after long work shifts, whispering, "Don't ever stop singing." He thought of the kids at his school who had listened to him sing and cheered him on, their quiet hope wrapped up in his voice. And he thought of Angie, his fiancée, whose gentle encouragement reminded him that it wasn't fame or fortune he was chasing, but life itself, lived fully, fearfully, and freely. At my age, it was a culmination. Between the kids and then Ang, he explained shortly after winning. You don't choose TV, TV chooses you. And when they come a-calling, Ang said, "You've got to go." It wasn't about chasing fame. It was about living. Fully, fearfully, but freely. Richard walked onto that AGT stage carrying more than a song. He carried the invisible scars of battles fought and survived, scars he chose finally to reveal to the world. America's new hero. From the very first note of his audition, the world recognized that something rare was unfolding. Richard Goodall didn't perform his song, he bared his soul. His voice, trembling slightly at first, quickly found its footing, rising, pure and golden, wrapping the theater in a silence so thick it felt like prayer. Heidi Klum's hand hovered over the golden buzzer almost instinctively, as if some universal force demanded that she act before the moment slipped away. When she finally pressed it, sending cascades of golden confetti raining down from the heavens, Simon Cowell's typically steely eyes softened, tears welled in the audience. For a few precious minutes, the world forgot its cynicism and simply felt. Richard became an overnight phenomenon. Headlines proclaimed the arrival of America's janitor, the voice that stopped the nation, and the unsung hero. Social media exploded with viral clips, reaction videos, and hastily drawn fan art. Terre Haute, Indiana, a town most people had never heard of, found itself thrust into the national conversation. Yet beneath the shimmering surface of fame, Richard knew a different story was unfolding, a quieter, heavier truth. As he stood on the AGT stage, glitter sticking to his skin, Richard's eyes flickered, not just with joy, but with something far more complicated. It wasn't nerves, it wasn't stage fright. It was the crushing awareness that dreams fulfilled often awaken old wounds. He felt it in the ache of absence, in the empty seat where his first wife would have been, cheering the loudest. He felt it in the bittersweet smile Angie offered backstage, fully supportive but quietly aware of the emotional tightrope Richard was walking. Fame came rushing at him like a tidal wave, and for a man who had spent his life in quiet hallways and whispered songs, it was almost too much. Everyone saw the victory. Few saw the battle it cost. With each performance, the expectations grew. So did the internal pressure. Richard wasn't just competing for a title. He was carrying the weight of decades, of promises made to ghosts, of dreams long deferred, of a heart that had been broken and somehow found a way to beat again. The world celebrated the singing janitor from Terre Haute, but Richard knew. Dreams once reignited come with a price, and not every cost could be paid in glitter and applause. A town rallies. A man battles within. Back home in Terre Haute, Indiana, an extraordinary transformation was taking place. The small, tight-knit town that had once watched Richard Goodall quietly push a mop down empty hallways now erupted in a wave of uncontainable pride. Storefronts on Wabash Avenue draped handmade banners in their windows. "Go Richard! Our golden voice!" Local diners named milkshakes after him. Churches included him in their Sunday prayers. Even West Vigo Middle School, where Richard had spent decades, threw open its gymnasium doors to host massive viewing parties. Students and teachers packed the bleachers, faces painted in homemade Team Richard shirts, chanting his name as he appeared on national television. Neighbors who had once passed Richard with little more than a polite nod now told reporters stories about his kindness, his humility, his rare gift. He became a local legend almost overnight, a symbol that dreams, no matter how delayed, could still come true. To many, Richard's voice was not just music. It was hope echoing through the heart of their community. But while Terre Haute celebrated, a very different storm raged within Richard himself. The fame he had so long imagined, fleeting fantasies whispered in the privacy of empty classrooms and long nights, had finally found him. Yet it had not brought the lightness he had hoped for. Instead, it tore open doors he'd kept bolted for years. Behind those doors was the accumulated weight of decades, lost opportunities, unspoken grief, quiet resignations to a life he never really wanted. Every spotlight felt hotter, every cheer heavier. He worried endlessly that he wasn't good enough, that the crowds would soon see through him, that he'd be revealed not as a star, but as a janitor who had gotten lucky. And so, even as the world lifted him up, Richard began the quietest, most brutal battle of his life, not against the expectations of others, but against the deeply ingrained belief that he didn't deserve any of it. On stage, Richard still commanded silence with the first notes he sang. His voice was as powerful and soul-stirring as ever, but for those paying closer attention, something had shifted. The first public sign came subtly. A missed appearance on a popular morning talk show was chalked up to schedule conflicts. A press junket was canceled, with representatives citing health precautions. Insiders, however, whispered the truth. Richard was exhausted. Not the exhaustion of a long workday, but the deeper, heavier kind, the kind born of emotional depletion. During live performances, critics praised his rawness, but some noted a new fragility threading through his music. His hands occasionally trembled while holding the microphone. His once confident stage banter grew shorter, more hesitant. And there were fleeting, heartbreaking moments when the camera caught a hollow, vacant look in his eyes, as if he were somewhere else entirely, fighting demons the audience could not see. Backstage, concern grew. Fellow contestants, many of whom had grown close to Richard, noticed how he would quietly slip away after performances, retreating into corners, avoiding cameras and conversations. His once warm laughter was now rare. Instead, there were long, heavy silences, broken only by whispered assurances that he was fine, even when it was clear he was anything but. Production crew members, seasoned in the brutal realities of televised fame, traded worried glances. They had seen it before, the meteoric rise, the crushing pressure, the unraveling just beyond the reach of the spotlight. And then there was Simon Cowell. Simon, who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless stars, watched Richard with a different kind of attention now. It was no longer just the interest of a judge evaluating a contestant. It was the quiet vigilance of someone who recognized the toll that dreams can exact when they come too suddenly, too forcefully. Simon, who had long ago learned to see beyond the performance to the person beneath, began keeping a silent, worried watch on Richard, knowing all too well that not every battle could be seen from the outside, and that not every voice, no matter how golden, could sing through heartbreak unscathed. As Richard advanced further into the competition, the thunderous applause from audiences across the country masked a darker truth. Richard Goodall was no longer fighting for a trophy. He was fighting for himself, for his balance, for his peace, for the fragile piece of hope that had brought him to this stage in the first place. And behind the glitter and glamour, the cracks beneath the surface widened, quietly, relentlessly, with every step closer to the finale, the breaking point. Finals night arrived like a tidal wave, overwhelming, electrifying, and merciless. The auditorium pulsed with an electric energy, 1,000 camera flashes stuttering like lightning strikes against the velvet darkness. Glittering banners fluttered from the rafters. Rows upon rows of spectators, judges, and television crews leaned forward in breathless anticipation, their collective excitement almost tangible in the thick air. And there, at the center of it all, stood Richard. Under the relentless spotlight, he looked both impossibly small and impossibly brave. a solitary figure whose very presence seemed to defy the crushing weight of the moment. Dressed in a simple dark suit, he clutched the microphone with trembling hands, his knuckles pale against the steel. The orchestra swelled. A single spotlight pinned him to the stage like a butterfly on velvet. Richard closed his eyes, inhaled, and began to sing. The song, a haunting ballad drenched in sorrow and trembling hope, floated out over the sea of faces. Every note quivered with raw, unfiltered emotion, as if each word pulled loose a hidden thread from deep within him. His voice wasn't just music. It was a memory. It was painful. It was love. It was everything he had ever lost, and everything he still dared to dream. The final aching note lingered in the air like mist over a broken field before slipping away into silence. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No claps, no cheers. Only the sound of a man who had laid his soul bare. And then the storm broke. The crowd erupted into deafening applause. Judges leapt to their feet, tears shining in their eyes. Banners were waved wildly in the crowd. Cameras panned over the sea of standing spectators, trying to capture the magnitude of the moment. Yet, amid the ovation, a camera caught a fleeting close-up of Richard's face, and what it revealed wasn't triumph. It was something infinitely heavier. His eyes, glistening beneath the blinding lights, stared into a distance no one else could see. His mouth, twisted into the hint of a smile, struggled against an invisible weight. Behind the performance, behind the adoration, behind the blinding floodlights, Richard Goodall was shattering quietly. This was no longer about winning a show. It was about survival, emotional, spiritual, and human. Fame had crowned him a hero, but inside the battle was far from over. He was exhausted, he was grieving, he was at his limit, and the world, cheering with all its might, didn't yet know just how fragile he had become. The news that shattered the moment of victory had long since passed, fading from the headlines into quieter rhythms of everyday life. Richard Goodall, America's Got Talent's humble champion, had stunned the world by returning quietly to his janitorial duties at West Vigo Middle School. The $1 million prize hadn't transformed him into a superstar. Instead, it led him back to Terre Haute, to familiar hallways and early morning routines. But behind this return was something unexpected, something that quietly troubled those who knew him well. Months after his headline-grabbing win, whispers began. Close friends and colleagues at the school noticed Richard's increasing fatigue. His normally vibrant presence dimmed. Dark circles appeared beneath his eyes, and he moved slower, favoring his left side, as though nursing unseen wounds. Concerned colleagues speculated privately, but Richard simply smiled, assuring them he was just tired from all the travel and attention. Then, quietly, the real news broke, not sensationally, but softly, through concerned social media posts and subtle community updates. Richard Goodall had suffered a significant health scare. Overwhelmed by months of emotional highs and endless media commitments, his body had simply buckled under the strain. It wasn't a dramatic collapse on stage or a scandalous headline, but a quiet, stark reminder of the toll taken by sudden fame. Word of Richard's health struggles reached Simon Cowell indirectly, through a routine TV appearance months later. Simon, invited onto a morning talk show ostensibly to discuss upcoming talent projects, unexpectedly found himself deeply affected when the conversation turned to Richard Goodall. Simon, recalling his interaction with Richard after the finale, said softly, "You meet thousands of people in this job, but every so often someone comes along who reminds you why you started in the first place." Richard isn't just talented, he is genuine, humble. People don't see the real price someone like him pays. For the first time in his storied, steely career, Simon Cowell wept openly on live television. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he buried his face in his hands. No sharp comments, no practiced smiles. That unscripted admission, vulnerable and brief, sparked a fresh wave of compassion and curiosity online. It wasn't the manufactured drama of reality TV, it was real, unscripted empathy, revealing how profoundly Richard's journey had affected even a veteran judge like Simon Cowell. Richard's true victory. The footage of Simon Cowell crying and Richard's quiet devastation tore through the internet like wildfire. Millions flooded social media with tributes. Artists, celebrities, and ordinary people alike sent messages of love and solidarity. In Terre Haute, Richard carried on. The bruises visible on his arms, subtle markers of his fatigue and overwork, became symbols of quiet endurance rather than public concern. No extravagant announcements or dramatic press releases accompanied his recovery. Instead, he continued sweeping floors and tidying classrooms, quietly reaffirming his commitment to normalcy despite the extraordinary circumstances. But normalcy didn't mean anonymity anymore. Not at West Vigo Middle School, where Richard's quiet resilience had turned into something larger. Students now lined up for his autograph, scribbling his name across their phone cases, folders, and Chromebook covers. The pride in the building was unmistakable. "The students were really excited," said Principal Christopher Tanner, who recalled one young girl bursting into tears when Richard was announced as the winner. That pride extended far beyond the students. Staff and teachers rallied around him, holding a welcome home celebration shortly after his return. Even between flights to California, Richard had never stopped showing up, and neither had his community. "He's brought this whole community together," Tanner said, describing the whirlwind of attention and support. "But Richard is so humble. What you see on TV, that's exactly who he is. It makes it easy for all of us here to stand behind him." In an interview after winning, Richard had reflected candidly, saying, "I'm just a regular person who's been through stuff, just like everyone else. Probably one of your questions is going to be, am I going to quit the school? I'm going to be there for a little while and see what comes our way and see where life takes us. We definitely want to place a home, and then we want to just kind of invest a little bit of the money smartly and just, do whatever life calls us to do." At West Vigo Middle School, no one was pressuring him for answers. Principal Christopher Tanner made it clear that whatever Richard decided, he would leave with the community's full support. "That's up to Richard," Tanner said. "He's been a huge part of our school culture and community these last 2 years, but I totally understand, and by all means, would graciously wish him well if he chose to go a different route." Richard's quiet resilience, set against the loud backdrop of fame and expectations, reminded everyone who heard his story that true victory wasn't measured in applause or dollar signs. Instead, it was in the simple courage to carry on, one quiet step at a time. In a humble ceremony, he sang, not for cameras, not for judges, not for viral fame, but for the memory of everything he had lost, and for the hope that still flickered stubbornly within him. Simon Cowell's tears on live TV were not just about sadness. They were an acknowledgement that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is keep singing through the heartbreak. After everything Richard Goodall endured, is it truly possible for him to heal and move forward? Or will the weight of his past continue to haunt him? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.